welcome to another season of the Black and Gold Report here on OaklandHockey.org. Corey Haggard here with you, and I am joined for our debut season episode with Ryan Boyd, the voice of the Ohio Bobcats. Ryan, and the off-season is over.
Yeah, man, it's exciting. We were just saying when you first called me that it seems like it was a quick off-season. I know it's the same time as every year, but kind of flew by, and as you and I have both been around the team recently, I know that I was recently at tryouts for the Bobcats, and it's crazy that it's back so quickly, but I couldn't be more excited.
All right, so excited here as well. Biggest change this year in the ACHA is that the coaches' rankings are gone. It's just going to be a computer-based rankings. So what are your thoughts on that overall?
I actually love it. I think that it's great in the sense that it takes away some of the subjectivity that goes into those weekly rankings. And, that's not to say that the coaches around the league don't know their stuff, they don't know the team, but the reality is this. You got a lot of teams that just simply don't see each other from week to week. You got Ohio that doesn't take on a team like, let's say, Oakland. In this upcoming season, the Bobcats don't see Oakland in the regular season. So, in my mind, while you can scoreboard watch and while you can see some players, this and that, it's tough in my mind for coaches to know how good a team really is, based on scoreboard watching rather than seeing that team in person. But when you take that computer system and it takes so many different factors into account, I feel that it really gets to the nitty-gritty part of what makes a team great, what makes a team better than maybe another team. So therefore, our ranking system is going to be a lot stronger than it's been in the past.
The other side of that is, as you know, Oakland went through a lot of injuries last season, and I think the old system was the reason why Oakland was able to make nationals in terms of, surviving the injuries and not being dropped significantly. The only bad thing I can see about this is that if you're a team that just gets decimated by injuries, you're in trouble,
Yeah, it is a good point, and it's kind of like the BCS system or something like that in college football, whatever you want to compare it to. You're right, there's little wiggle room is the word that I would use, or the phrase I would use, and they're not going to be kind to teams that have those types of problems, no matter how talented they are. But what it does do, and this is the thing that I would say in response to that, it asks teams and it asks players to step up and respond to adversity. And I know that in the case of Oakland, for example, it's incredibly tough to ask for something like that when you lose some of your most important players. But you got young guys, you got guys that aren't as experienced, and at some point or another, you're going to have to rely on them. You're going to need them to step up and make something happen, something positive for the team. This system requires that you're not just going to skate by. You're not going to barely get in regardless of if you lose 5 or 6 games in a row, this and that. You need everybody to work hard. You need everybody to come in and do something for your team, especially if you have injuries. And I like that it forces 30 guys or however many guys are on that roster all to contribute at some point during the year.
And, it's going to help out a team like Arizona, who really got screwed over last season, did Sean Hogan and his boys over there, in terms of, they were clearly the better team that should have been there. And, it just, and I don't want to say this was going on or anything, but it takes away the favoritism aspect, too, if you're, East Coast bias team versus West Coast bias, that type of thing,
That's absolutely right, you got not only the East Coast and West Coast bias, but you got so many rivalries in there. And I'm not one to assume or I'm not pointing fingers, but yeah, let's say, for example, and I don't know this to be true, but let's say we know that Arizona and Arizona State, huge rivals, as big as you can find in this league. There's always that wonder, you can always wonder if that rivalry goes into where teams are placing standings, or whether it be a rivalry between, let's say, Ohio and West Virginia or Kent State, whatever it may be. You always wonder if there could be some dislike to the opponent that affects them or hurts them in the rankings. And again, while I can't prove that that's the case, it's just human nature. I know that me, as a sports fan, if I dislike a team, I'd be more likely to not give them favorable ratings or not give them a spot in the national tournament, whatever it may be. So with this system, like you were saying, Corey, you remove that bias because the system can care less who's in the top 20. It doesn't matter to them or to that system. So therefore, those best 20 teams in theory should find themselves in Delaware this year at the end of the season.
Right, and I was going to talk about this a little later, but since you brought up the whole Arizona State thing, you know, I think that this is finally the year that Arizona is going to get one against ASU. What do you think about that?
Man, that's a tough one for me. I think that from all that I've heard surrounding Arizona State, I think they're going to be really, really tough this year. They have a good recruiting class. They brought in a number of different guys, and obviously most teams don't give away many specifics before the year begins, but that's one of the few teams that does release news articles here and there, and they kind of talk up the recruiting class that they have. And I think Arizona State's going to be very, very good. I think they're still a top 5 program in the ACHA, if not one of the top 2 or 3. So it's going to require that Arizona has a really good performance to knock them off, because I still think that Arizona's a team that's maybe 13 to 17 in the rankings, something like that. So they're still behind them. But you're right that it's not out of the realm of possibility. I think that they played enough close games last year, and it's an Arizona team that's only going to get better. So if it's going to happen, this is definitely a year in which it will happen, and that's basically where I stand on that.
Right, and I would just say this. I know a little bit about the Arizona class, and I think that by far it's going to be the best class they've had in years. And obviously, this is Sean Hogan's third year there, so this is going to be his best recruiting class that he's had there. And technically, it's really his second recruiting class, because his first season he didn't get in there until late July. So just based on that, I just see that in the numbers game too, that just logically it finally has to end, and they had a couple close calls last year, so that's why I think that we're finally going to see it this year. But ASU, yeah, of course they're stacked, they're loaded, they always are. But we'll see how that works for them coming up in this season.
Listen, I can't say this enough either, and I'll be brief, but Hogan is a terrific coach. I know that here at Ohio, they came and played us a couple of years back, and I think it was last year, in fact. I get my years confused. But when they came into town, Dan Morris, who was the old head coach of Ohio hockey, he had nothing but great things to say about that man. He had all the hope in the world that Arizona program was going to be competitive, not only in this upcoming year, but for many years to come. When you got a coach of that caliber, it's only a matter of time before you're competing with your rival and pretty much anybody in this league.
Right. Speaking of new coaches, Oakland has a new head coach. Their old head coach, Jeremy Backus, took a WSHL job, and Gordy Scheffler, who's been an assistant here for quite a while, this is now his 9th season, takes over the reins as head coach. Ohio's got a new head coach. U of M Dearborn's got a new head coach. Just trying to think off the top of my head here. Kent State has a new head coach. Western Michigan has a new head coach. So there's a lot of different changes going on around the ACHA. But in terms of the new head coaches, who do you think is in the best situation?
I think, and I don't want this to sound too biased.
I'm going to agree with you.
I think that Ohio has set themselves up brilliantly moving forward, and here's why. And it's the process that's been long in the making, but Jonathan Sheridan, who takes over as the head coach of the Bobcats, is not only a great hockey mind. I mean, he's a guy that played collegiate hockey. He's a guy that's been around the sport his entire life. But ever since he was a young kid, he's been playing hockey with minds that are from Ohio University. He was coached back in his younger days by a man named Steve Witt, who was a alumni of this hockey program. He also worked with a couple of other names in the Bobcat program. So he's, for the longest time, been learning how this team plays, playing under that system. Then he comes to the program last year as an assistant coach. He's under Dan Morris, who quite simply is the biggest face that this team has ever seen, one of the biggest in the ACHA, considering that he as a coach and a player has won 4 national championships. So he sits for a year, learns all that he can, and if you talk to John, he'll tell you that he has soaked up so much information that's unbelievable from Dan Morris. So I think you take all of his past years, you take last year with Dan Morris, you have to think, given the class that Ohio has, they have a strong recruiting class, you have to think that the Bobcats are still set to be in pretty great shape.
We'll get to the recruiting classes in just a second here, but one thing too is that you guys had Pillmore sign an ECHL deal end of last season. Oakland had Dustin Hoffner sign an ECHL contract. And the biggest news of this offseason was former Oakland defenseman Todd Orlando getting an invite to the main camp of the Philadelphia Flyers. And that story is on the Oakland site and the ACHA site for those of you listening that missed it. What does that say? And Gordy Shuffler was the defensive coach here when Todd Orlando played defense here at Oakland, and Sean Hogan was his head coach, just going back to that whole coaches thing we just talked about. But what are your thoughts on that?
Like I just said, it's absolutely awesome for all three of those guys. Obviously, the biggest one being the NFL or NHL opportunity. It's amazing for the three guys in particular. First of all, got to congratulate them. I know that I've talked to Fillmore in particular on the phone a couple of times during this offseason, and he, just like either of those two guys, ecstatic about the opportunity. They all are proud to represent their school, to represent their league at the higher level. So that's awesome for them individually. And as far as the ACHA is concerned, I'm telling you, Corey, and you know this as well as anybody, this league, while it doesn't have the NCAA strapped to it, doesn't have that title with it, this is a competitive league. And I saw it last year when the Bobcats traveled to Penn State, almost beat that Division I opponent in game number 2 of that two-game set. The players in this league, especially on the teams like Oakland or Ohio that are ranked highly every year, they are the real deal. These guys are top-notch collegiate players, and a lot of people just don't know a lot about the league. They don't hear the name enough. They don't, for whatever reason, they haven't been conditioned to believe that this is a legitimate collegiate hockey league. So when guys like these past three during this offseason get the opportunities that they do, there's more, people that are shown what this league has to offer and how good these teams truly are. And in the long run, if this continues to happen, you're going to see the ACHA blow up. There's going to be more teams. There's going to be better athletes. There's going to be more guys that have the opportunity to play at the professional level. This is just the beginning, in my mind, of what's going to be a really fun run for the ACHA.
We're here with Ryan Boyd on the Black and Gold Report. He is the voice of the Ohio Bobcats hockey team. And speaking of that, Ryan, that point that you made is, and I don't want to name specific names or anything, but just in general conversations with coaches around the league before games and things like that, where Oakland's playing another team, they would ask how we're doing, and then the conversation of, recruiting would come up, and they're all baffled as to why guys would go to a bad NCAA D3 team instead of come to one of the top ACHA teams in the Division I level here. And, that's just goes back to your point of the league and maybe just not knowing, just having the ACHA instead of the NCAA in front of it. But you can go to a ACHA team and win, or go to some NCAA D3 teams and we might win 5 games a season. And that's been kind of a pitching point to some of these coaches that they're trying to use with these kids. But so I don't take up too much of your time. Speaking of new teams, Rochester College, Wayne State, Colorado State, and Colorado are at the ACHA D1 level now. Who do you think is going to be the best of those 4 off the bat?
I think that my guess would be, and I honestly don't know a ton about each of those teams, but my belief would be that it'll be either Colorado or Colorado State. And the reason that I believe that, and I could end up being completely incorrect, but the reason I believe it is that not only do they have the ability during this offseason to recruit at the ACHA Division I level, and they both claim to have some good prospects coming in. I know that the Rams in particular have really talked up the recruiting class that they have. They think that they've got some great athletes. But the other thing that I think benefits them is that in the state of Colorado, at those two schools, those are the biggest two schools. They both have 20,000, 25,000, whatever it is, students. So when they hold those open tryouts, you've got to think, at least I would believe, that you're going to have a student body that's excited about the fact that they are now playing at the highest ACHA level. So I would assume that the turnout numbers for those tryouts will be extremely high, and there's the opportunity then for these teams to find maybe some sleeper players that you would not usually expect to have on your roster that could maybe push them to be a little bit better than some expect. Now, I obviously don't expect any of them to be great in their very first campaign, but if I had to choose, I think that because of that student body size and the potential for some walk-on talent, I would take either Colorado or Colorado State.
And out of those new teams, Oakland will be seeing all of them this season, except for Colorado. So Colorado State is coming here. We've got Rochester College and Wayne State, but those are both Michigan teams, right, in the Detroit area with Oakland, so you're going to see them anyways. So I know we talked about recruiting a little bit. Give us a little bit of a scoop on the Ohio's recruiting class. I know I can't mention anything about what Oakland's bringing in because Oakland still has tryouts here coming up on Tuesday, and they still have some spots they're looking to fill. But tell us about Ohio.
First and foremost, the biggest thing for Ohio during the offseason was to get some size on this hockey team. And the reason they did that, and Corey, I know that you, again, will know exactly what I'm talking about, and if any of the folks out there listening had the opportunity to see Minot State play, they'll also be able to relate to this. Dan Morris, first and foremost, when he was still the head coach, and even John Sheridan is now in charge, they saw a Minot State team that was overwhelmingly big for the Bobcats. Every single time the Bobcats played them last year, they left the arena saying, man, we have got to find some bigger, more aggressive, more physical guys that are going to help us against teams like that, especially because we play in a smaller arena here at Bird Arena. So the first thing the Bobcats did in the offseason was they went out and got a lot of big guys. In fact, they bring in a couple of defensemen that are 6'3" to 6'5". They have a forward that is 6'4" and that'll be on one of the top lines for this team this year, at least. One would expect that in the upcoming season. They have not finalized any of those lines, but it's Joe Breslin is the name you want to watch out for. He, a big body on the forward side. So that was the first thing they tried to address. The second thing the Bobcats tried to do with their recruiting class this year is they tried to make up for some of the things that they lost with their seniors last year. And that seems like an obvious thing to say, Corey, but the Bobcats lost so many unique things in their senior class. And it's weird because Ohio only lost 4 seniors, but they lost the leading scorer in Tyler Fillmore. They lost a great goal scorer in Nick Rosbeck, and then the other 2 guys they lost were forwards. They didn't score very often, but they were the faces of the penalty kill. So the Bobcats knew that if they were going to be as good as they were last year, they needed guys that could facilitate those roles. And while they believed there were certainly some guys on the roster currently that could do it, they wanted to make sure there were some freshmen that could step in if one of the returners wasn't able to fill into one of those roles. So while I'm not exactly sure who will do what just yet, the team is extremely confident because they believe they have that size and some guys that do the small things well that will help the team be successful, like killing a penalty or making the right pass right before a goal is scored. Small things like that that help a team be successful.
Now, I know that final thing here, since I can't get into anything with Oakland or anything because I don't know much of anything to get into, but what's the yeah, exactly. See, that's what you say. What's your thoughts on, based on what you saw from Oakland last year, in terms of what you think they need to do in terms of additions?
Well, I think the first thing for Oakland, and this is not really addition based, but the first thing for Oakland is obviously going to be staying healthy this year, and that's not something that you can't snap your fingers and make that happen. It's just something that some teams have problems with, others don't. So you have to hope that they find a way to do that. So with that in mind, I think that finding some depth for the team is extremely important. You want to find young guys that not only can step in to be a big-time addition to the team right away. I mean, you want guys like last year, for example, the Bobcats had a freshman that stepped in and had 40 points. You'd love to find something like that. That'd be outstanding. But more than anything, when you're a team that's bouncing off of a season in which you had some injuries, you want to find some new guys that are there, maybe not in uniform every single night, but guys that you're confident can step in when necessary and help your team find a victory. The other thing I think for Oakland is going to be important is improving a little bit on the defensive end. Now, I'm not sure exactly how many guys they're bringing back as far as defensemen are concerned, or even forwards that play a defensive role. They may be bringing back a lot, I'm not sure, but when Oakland was down here in Athens last year, they played the first game really tough. It was a great game. It was back and forth. The second game, though, I remember the Bobcats won 6-0. They jumped on Oakland early, and they really, in that game, kind of picked apart the defense that Oakland had, and they showed where some of those holes were as far as the defense is concerned. If they can get a couple of extra bodies, maybe some bigger guys, kind of like Ohio won, they can fill it up on the defensive end and keep opponents off the board, I think that Oakland will score enough to be really, really competitive, so it comes down to that as far as I'm concerned.
Right on, exactly, Ryan. And I guess it's unfortunate we're not playing each other this year. I know that just couldn't find a date in common to make that happen. Obviously,
Right.
with the way things are going here, but excitement level for the season coming up here, and it should be a lot of fun. Who do you guys open up with?
Oh, we play John Carroll on the 20th.
Okay. Yep. We open up with 2 games against Western Michigan, so we get right in the conference play right off the bat. So it should be a lot of fun. But I do want to thank you for joining us here, Ryan, and we'll be in touch for sure throughout the rest of the season.
Yeah, Corey, as always, I appreciate it, man, and good luck this year to you and also to your team. Obviously, the relationship between Ohio U and Oakland U has always been a good one. So we wish you the best.
Same here, Ryan. We will see you at Nationals.